As I was carefully ladling my family's heirloom chicken soup, my daughter-in-law snatched the hot ladle right out of my hand. "You've ruined my perfect shot. You're useless," Tiffany hissed as the scalding metal spoon slammed against the back of my hand, leaving a bright red welt. My son, Scott, who was watching a football game in the living room, simply turned up the volume on the TV, the roar of the crowd drowning out my quiet whimper of pain. That night, they threw me out of the house with just $300 to my name. Scott watched me drag my suitcase to the door and whispered, "This is just for things to cool down, Mom," as if his betrayal was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But what neither of them knew in that moment was that they had just given me the one thing I needed: freedom. And tucked away in my worn-out handbag was the key to a legacy. A legacy that would turn me from a cast-off mother into the master of their fate. I am Clara Mae Thompson, a 66-year-old widow from Charlotte, and this is the story of how I was pushed onto the streets by my own son and found a multi-million-dollar inheritance that helped me get everything back, and then some. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to listen to more meaningful life stories with us. Your support is our biggest motivation to keep sharing. My hands, well, they tell the story of a lifetime. The skin is thinner now, dotted with age spots like a map of memories, but the calluses from 30 years as a nurse are still there, tough and resilient. These are the hands that took pulses, changed dressings, and soothed a little boy's midnight fevers. They're also the hands that held on tight to Paul's, my husband of 50 years, during his final moments on this earth. After Paul passed, my world was just quiet, a vast emptiness filled with memories and the echoes of the past. Scott, our only child, called, his voice sounding so urgent and worried over the phone. "Mom, you can't live alone in that house," he'd said. "It's too big, too empty. You won't be safe. Come live with us." And I, a mother who still saw her little boy in the 40-year-old man, chose to believe him. I packed 50 years of my life into 4 suitcases, leaving behind the home where Scott's laughter once echoed, where Paul and I had danced in the kitchen on Sunday nights, and where every corner held a piece of our story. The penthouse my son called home was on the top floor of a gleaming glass tower in Myers Park, one of Charlotte's most luxurious neighborhoods. It was a world away from everything I'd ever known. The ebony floors were polished to such a high sheen I could see my own distorted reflection in them. The furniture was all sharp angles and minimalist beauty, looking like it had been lifted straight from an architectural magazine and would protest if anyone dared to sit on it too comfortably. There wasn't a single family photo on the side tables. No little knickknacks, worthless in price but priceless in story. This place was a showroom, not a home. That first morning, I was up at 5, a nurse's habit that's hard to break, while the city below was still asleep under a blanket of fog. I found my way to the kitchen, a huge space of white marble and stainless steel. The state-of-the-art appliances hummed quietly, a steady, mechanical breathing. I decided to make blueberry pancakes, Scott's absolute favorite when he was growing up. I could still picture him sitting at the table, his little legs swinging in the air, his eyes wide with anticipation for that first hot stack. I mixed the batter carefully, making sure it was perfectly smooth. I handpicked every plump blueberry, rinsing them and letting them drain. As the first pancakes hit the hot griddle, a sweet, warm aroma began to fill the air, a smell of memory, of love, a small rebellion against the sterile air of this kitchen. I meticulously stacked the finished pancakes on a white porcelain plate, topping them with fresh berries and a dusting of powdered sugar as fine as the first snow. I set the plate on the dining table, feeling a small spark of joy, a sense that I could still be useful. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, swept into the kitchen about 2 hours later. She was wearing a silk robe the color of jade, her blonde hair already in a perfect top knot at 7 in the morning. One hand held her smartphone like it was a permanent extension of her body, the other a glass of warm lemon water. She stopped, her blue eyes narrowing at the plate of pancakes on the table. A silence stretched for a moment, just long enough for me to feel the warmth in my chest begin to cool. "Clara Mae," she finally said, her use of my full name, not Mom, sounding so formal and distant. "Next time, Could you arrange the blueberries in a spiral? It works better for the Instagram algorithm. She had no intention of eating them. She was just seeing my breakfast as a prop. Tiffany glided over, adjusted the plate's angle slightly, placed her lemon water beside it for composition, then held up her phone and snapped nearly a dozen photos. Finished, she tapped away at the screen, probably writing some caption about "a perfect morning starts with simple things." Then, without a word of thanks, without even a glance in my direction, she turned and left the kitchen, leaving the fragrant pancakes to grow cold on the table, just like my heart in that moment. I stood there, looking at the blueberries I'd so carefully chosen, feeling like a fool. I had tried to bring a little warmth from the past into this cold present, but it seemed that here, even memories had to be curated for an algorithm. The days melted into a steady, draining rhythm. I had turned myself into an unpaid housekeeper. I woke up the earliest, made the coffee an expensive organic blend that Tiffany insisted on. I prepared breakfast, cleaned the kitchen. I did the laundry, ironing Scott's shirts and Tiffany's silk dresses. I cleaned the apartment, making sure not a speck of dust dared to settle on the gleaming surfaces. I did it all in silence, moving like a shadow so as not to disturb Tiffany's workspace, her work seemingly consisting of taking pictures of herself and expensive objects and posting them online. Scott left for work early and came home late. When he did, he looked exhausted, his face etched with the worries of a man in a constant battle with money. Every evening, I'd make him a hot ginger tea, the kind I used to make for him when he was up late studying. He'd take the mug, his eyes glued to the complex charts of stocks on his iPad. "Thanks, Mom," he'd mumble, the words a reflex, empty and hollow. He never really looked at me. He never asked how my day was, or if I was okay living here. It was as if my presence was as natural and expected as the air necessary, but completely invisible. One evening, as I was placing the tea on the small table beside Scott's sofa, Tiffany came out of her office, a scowl on her face. "Clara May," she said, her tone as sharp as broken glass. "Have you seen my Vogue collection? You've put them in the wrong order. It's supposed to be chronological, left to right. Now I have to reorganize the whole thing." It was an accusation for a mistake I didn't even know I could make. I had simply dusted the bookshelf and straightened the stack of magazines. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know." Scott sighed, a heavy breath of exhaustion and annoyance. He didn't say a word in my defense. He didn't tell his wife it was a trivial matter. He just took a sip of his tea, his eyes never leaving the screen. His silence was worse than any scolding. It was an agreement, an acceptance that his wife's annoyance was more important than his mother's dignity. That night, I went back to my guest room, a small space at the end of the hall with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the darkness. I wasn't a mother living with her son. I was a free ghost, cleaning up the pieces of their glamorous lives, a convenient presence taken for granted. I had given up my home, my independence, my entire life for this false sense of security, only to realize that the most dangerous place in the world can sometimes be the very place you think you belong. Tears began to roll down my cheeks, but I didn't make a sound. I had learned to cry silently, because in this house, even my sorrow felt like an inconvenience. The cold in this house wasn't just from the air conditioning, always set to a brutally low temperature, or from the marble and metal surfaces that constantly radiated a chill. The cold that seeped into my bones came from the loneliness, from the long silences in conversations, and from the feeling of being just a moving object, an unnamed helper in my own family. I tried to find warmth in small things, in the old habits I carried with me from my former life. One of them was cooking. The kitchen had once been my domain, a place where I turned simple ingredients into tangible love. So, on a gloomy Tuesday afternoon, when the Charlotte sky was the color of slate, I decided to make my family's heirloom chicken soup. It wasn't just a dish, it was medicine for the soul, something my mother used to make for me when I was sick, and something I had made for Scott countless times throughout his childhood. I remembered the smell of ginger and onions sautéing, the sound of the broth simmering on the stove, and the sight of golden egg noodles mingling with tender pieces of chicken. The aroma of the soup began to spread, a real, comforting smell that was completely out of place in the sterile elegance of this kitchen. It felt like a whisper from the past, trying to make its way into the present. I was carefully tasting the soup one last time when Tiffany walked in, dressed in a tight-fitting designer yoga outfit. Though I'd never actually seen her do yoga, she was carrying a tripod for her phone. "Clara May," she announced, rather than asked. "I'm going to shoot a short cooking tutorial for my channel. Just follow my directions." And just like that, my kitchen became a film set. Tiffany set up her phone on the tripod, adjusted the lighting from a professional ring light she brought out, and began her performance. She didn't cook. She just stood beside me, posing and directing. "And hey guys," she said with a bright smile to the camera, "the secret to the perfect chicken soup isn't just fresh ingredients, but a touch of saffron to give it that rich, luxurious golden color." She signaled for me to add a few threads of saffron to the pot. I obeyed, feeling like a puppet. My hands, the hands that had once saved lives, were now following the direction of a girl who only cared about how luxurious food looked on a phone screen. "Perfect," she whispered when the broth turned a beautiful shade of gold. "Now, ladle the soup into that white porcelain bowl. Gently, don't spill anything." I picked up the Le Creuset ladle, an expensive piece of cookware I always felt nervous using. It was heavy and a bit awkward in my hands, which were used to simpler tools. I carefully scooped up a full ladle of soup, trying to hold it steady. But maybe it was nerves, or the unfamiliar weight of the ladle, but a single, tiny drop of soup escaped the edge and landed on the pristine white marble countertop, right in Tiffany's perfect frame. A single drop of gold on a field of white. A tiny imperfection. Tiffany stopped filming immediately. The radiant smile on her face froze, then melted away, replaced by a twisted mask of fury. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice losing all its fake sweetness and becoming shrill and angry. "Do you have any idea how important a perfect shot is? Everything has to be clean. Spotless. You've ruined everything." I'm sorry," I stammered, quickly looking for a cloth to wipe it up. "It's just one little drop." "One little drop?" she practically screamed. "You don't get it. This is my personal brand. It's about professionalism. You are just useless." In her rage, she snatched the hot ladle from my hand. Her movement was too violent, too sudden. I don't think she meant to hit me. I think she just wanted to take her anger out on an inanimate object. She slammed the ladle down on the marble countertop with a sharp, angry crack, but the force of the blow was so strong that the heavy metal ladle bounced, flew out of her hand, and spun through the air. The hot, metal part of the spoon, fresh from the boiling soup, grazed the back of my hand. A sharp, searing pain shot through me. I pulled my hand back, clutching it as I let out a small cry. A red welt immediately appeared on my delicate skin, burning and throbbing. From the living room, the booming voice of a sportscaster on the large-screen TV was shouting about a touchdown for the Carolina Panthers. I knew Scott was there. He must have heard his wife's shouting, and probably my cry of pain. Through the doorway, I saw him glance quickly toward the kitchen. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. I saw annoyance and irritation in his eyes, not concern. Then, he did something small, an action that had the force of a knife wound. Scott picked up the remote control and turned the volume on the TV up even louder. The roar of the virtual stadium crowd now drowned out every other sound in the apartment, drowning out Tiffany's muttered curses, and most importantly, drowning out my very real pain. My world just stopped. The searing heat on the back of my hand suddenly meant nothing. It couldn't compare to the icy cold that had just shot through my heart. My son, the child I had carried and birthed, the boy I had stayed up with through countless nights of sickness, the man I loved unconditionally, had chosen the cheers of a game over the sound of his mother's heart breaking. He had chosen silence. He had chosen a side, not with words, but with the most cruel and dismissive action possible. In that moment, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt betrayed. Something fragile and precious inside me, maybe the last shred of my faith in a mother's love, shattered into a million pieces. The ladle might leave a scar on my skin, but my son's action carved a wound deep in my soul, a wound I knew would never heal. I stood there, amidst the aroma of the cooling chicken soup, cradling my burning hand, and felt an emptiness so profound it was terrifying. The dull ache on the back of my hand throbbed all evening, but it was just a faint reminder of a deeper, quieter pain that was eating away at my soul. I treated the burn myself in the bathroom, applying some ointment and covering it with a small bandage. I did it all in silence, without a single complaint. Tiffany never apologized. She acted as if nothing had happened, scrolling on her phone in the living room, occasionally laughing at something on the screen. Scott was the same, completely absorbed in his game, letting out an excited shout now and then. I was like a ghost gliding past them. My existence, my pain, had no effect on their perfect world. But something had changed. My resigned silence was gone, replaced by a quiet but fierce resistance. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't continue being an invisible shadow, a doormat for their selfishness. I looked at the pot of chicken soup, the very thing I had poured my heart and memories into, and now it seemed like a symbol of my wasted efforts, of a love rejected. With a resolve that surprised even me, I walked back into the kitchen. I lifted the heavy pot of soup, walked to the stainless steel sink, and poured it all out. The golden broth, the chicken, carrots, and egg noodles, all of it rushed down the drain with an angry, gurgling sound. It was the sound of release. It was the first thing I had done for myself after months of only doing for others. That noise was finally loud enough to cut through the roar of the TV. Tiffany's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief and anger. "What in the world are you doing?" "I'm cleaning up," I replied, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, calm to the point of being chilling. "I don't think anyone here deserves this soup." It was a declaration of war. A huge argument broke out, not like the one-sided scolding from before. This time, I fought back. I didn't yell, but every word I spoke was sharp, honed by months of suppressed humiliation. I talked about being treated like a servant, about her ingratitude, about how she had burned me. Finally, Scott was forced to intervene. He stood up, shut off the TV, and the sudden silence made the room feel even more tense. He stood between me and his wife, his face a mask of exhaustion and conflict. I looked into his eyes, searching for a flicker of sympathy, a shred of the love I knew was once there. But all I saw was inconvenience. I was a problem to be solved, an interruption to his peaceful evening. "Mom," he began, his tone attempting to be conciliatory but dripping with condescension. "You need to calm down. You're overreacting. Maybe you just need some space to think things over." Tiffany's been under a lot of stress with her work, too. Space. The word was a bitter irony. I had all the space in the world in my loneliness in this very house. "Tiffany is stressed?" I let out a dry, mirthless laugh. The stress of choosing which filter to use on a photo? Do you have any idea what it's like to feel invisible in your own family, Scott? But my words were like water off a duck's back. Scott had already made his decision. He didn't want to face the truth, didn't want to confront his own cowardice. The easiest path was to remove the source of the conflict, and in his eyes, that source was me. "I think it's best if you stay in a hotel for a few days," he said, his voice now cold and final, "just to let things cool down." He walked over, pulled out his wallet, and took out 3 crisp, emotionless $100 bills. He pushed them into my good hand. "This should be enough for a few nights. We'll talk after that. We'll talk after that." An empty promise. I knew there would be no talk. This was a farewell. He turned to his phone, his thumb swiping quickly across the screen. "I've called an Uber. It'll be here in 5 minutes." I didn't say another word. What was there left to say? I quietly went to my room and pulled out the small suitcase I had arrived with. I didn't have much to pack. A few sets of clothes, a couple of books, and the single wedding photo of Paul and me that I kept on my nightstand. I looked at our happy smiles in the picture, a sharp pain twisting in my chest. "Paul, if you were here, you would never have let this happen. But he wasn't here, and I had to face this storm alone." As I dragged my suitcase into the living room, the Uber had already arrived. Scott stood by the door, unable to look me in the eye. Tiffany had vanished into their bedroom. Fine. I didn't want to see her face again anyway. "Mom, take care," Scott mumbled, the words so hollow they were cruel. I didn't answer. I pulled my suitcase, stepped over the threshold, and walked into the elevator without a single glance back. As the gleaming metal elevator doors slowly closed, reflecting my blurred image, it felt like a prison gate was shutting behind me. But I didn't know that I had just walked from one prison into another, one that was much larger and far more terrifying. The car drove me away in silence. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. I realized I didn't even know where I wanted to go. "Just head downtown," I said, picking a direction at random. The car stopped at the corner of Trade and Tryon, the heart of Charlotte's financial district. I paid and got out, pulling my small suitcase, my only possession in the world. All around me, the bank towers soared proudly, their glass walls reflecting the city's brilliant neon lights. A river of people rushed past me, strangers lost in their own worlds. And there I stood, a 66-year-old woman with a burn on her hand and a broken heart, completely lost in all this glittering haste. I found a cheap motel in the phone book, a place far from these gleaming towers. The room I rented smelled of mildew and cheap disinfectant. The carpet was worn, and the old TV only got a few staticky channels. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the distant wail of an ambulance. $300. At $50 a night, I could stay here for 6 days. 6 days to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. The following days passed in a fog of hopelessness. I barely left the room, subsisting on saltine crackers from the vending machine in the hall. I tried calling Scott. The first time, it rang for a long time before going to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. The second time, the call was immediately rejected. I knew what that meant. He had my number saved, and he had actively chosen not to answer. By the 6th day, my money was gone. The motel manager, a portly man with tired eyes, knocked on my door. "Ma'am, it's time to pay up or check out." I had no choice. I once again pulled my suitcase, walked out of the motel and onto the street, this time without a single penny to my name. I walked aimlessly, with no destination in mind. Shame and despair were a heavier burden than the suitcase I dragged along the sidewalk. I passed by fancy restaurants, seeing couples laughing inside, and felt like I was from another planet. As night fell, my feet were aching. I found myself in a small park, across from the NASCAR Hall of Fame, a sleek and glamorous building. I sat down on a cold park bench under the pale yellow glow of a streetlight. Other homeless people were finding their own spots for the night, curling up in thin blankets or on pieces of cardboard. I looked at them, and for the first time in my life, I realized I was no longer different. I was one of them. That was the longest night of my life. I couldn't sleep. I sat huddled on the bench, clutching my handbag, shivering from the cold and from fear. I heard the sound of police sirens, a shout from somewhere in the distance, and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I thought of Scott and Tiffany, probably sleeping soundly in their comfortable bed, in their warm apartment, without a single thought for the mother and mother-in-law they had thrown out onto the street. Hunger began to torment me the next day. My initial shame was replaced by a primal need. I did something I could have never imagined. I went through a dumpster behind a restaurant. I found half a leftover sandwich and a few cold French fries. I ate them hurriedly in a dark alley, tears mixing with the saltiness of the discarded food. That was the moment I hit rock bottom. I, Clara Mae Thompson, a nurse who had spent her life caring for others, was now searching for sustenance in society's garbage. I had lost everything: my family, my home, my money, and most importantly, my dignity. I was just an invisible old woman, sitting on a park bench, waiting for nothing. I looked up at the glittering skyscrapers in the distance, the buildings where my son worked in one of them, and felt a profound bitterness. They had thrown me out of their house. But the truth was, they had thrown me out of their lives, without an ounce of mercy. And in the cold, dark night of Charlotte, I was utterly alone, drowning in despair. Time in the park became a blur. Days and nights blended into a long, hazy stretch of mere existence. I learned to distinguish which sounds were harmless and which ones signaled danger. I learned that the kindness of strangers sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Another homeless man shared half his loaf of bread with me. A young woman placed a hot cup of coffee beside me without saying a word. But I also learned to endure the stares, the contempt, and the fear from people who walked by, who saw me as an ugly part of the cityscape, something to be avoided. My small, worn, navy blue suitcase was the only thing connecting me to my past life. It held a few sets of clothes, now wrinkled and dirty, a couple of books I no longer had the heart to read, and my wedding photo with Paul. Every night, I would pull it close, hugging it like a flimsy shield against the cold and the loneliness. It was all I had left. One afternoon, maybe my fourth or fifth day on the streets, I wasn't sure, a sudden downpour began. It was a cold, persistent North Carolina autumn rain. People hurried for cover, leaving me alone on the drenched park bench. I tried to shove my suitcase under the bench to protect it, but it was useless. The rain soaked through, and I suddenly felt an irrational panic that my last remaining memories would be destroyed. I opened the suitcase to check on things, hoping to use a sweater to wrap the wedding photo. As I slid my hand under the worn, torn lining at the bottom of the case, an old habit from past travels to hide important items, my fingers brushed against something hard and cold. It wasn't a fold in the fabric. It was there, hidden on purpose. My heart beat a little faster. I used my fingernail to gently pry at the old lining. The fabric tore away, revealing a small, old-fashioned metal key, not one of the modern electronic kinds. It had a number etched into its side and a small piece of paper tied to it with a faded red string. On the paper, in Paul's familiar handwriting, were the words, "Bank of America, Main Branch, Box 317. I sat there, stunned, in the pouring rain, staring at the key in my palm. A safe deposit box? Paul had never told me about this. He was a history teacher, a simple, careful, and somewhat stoic man. Our life had always been comfortable, but never extravagant. We had a retirement fund, insurance, but certainly nothing that would need to be kept in a high-security box at the biggest bank in the city. A tiny flicker of hope, as fragile as a candle in the wind, began to glow inside me. Could it be? Could there be some cash in there that he'd saved? A few hundred, maybe even $1,000? That would be enough to rent a room, to have a roof over my head for a few weeks. Just the thought of it gave me a new surge of strength. The rain seemed a little less cold. The heavy weight of despair in my chest seemed to lift, just a little. The next morning, I knew I had to act. I couldn't walk into a major bank looking like this. I used the last of the coins a passerby had given me to go into a public restroom and clean myself up as best I could. I washed my face, combed my tangled hair with my fingers, and put on the cleanest jacket I had left in my suitcase. I still looked worn out, but at least I no longer looked completely destitute. I walked into the main branch of Bank of America, a majestic skyscraper of glass and steel. The inside was vast, elegant, and cold, with polished marble floors and immaculately dressed employees. I felt small and out of place. I took a deep breath, trying to project an air of calm dignity, and walked up to the service counter. The woman behind the counter gave me a slightly scrutinizing look, but remained professional. I presented the key and my old driver's license, explaining that I was Clara Thompson, wife of the box holder, the late Paul Thompson. After a bit of verification on her computer and an internal phone call, she led me to a high-security room in the back. "This is a private viewing room, ma'am," she said, gesturing to a small, discreet space with a table and 2 chairs. "You can take as much time as you need." Another security officer used a master key along with mine to open a metal drawer in a wall packed with identical drawers. He pulled out a long, gray metal box, placed it on the table in front of me, and then politely left, closing the heavy door behind him. I sat alone in the dead silent room, the only sound the pounding of my heart in my ears. My hand trembled as I placed it on the lid of the box. I took one more deep breath and opened it. Inside, there was no cash as I had hoped. On top was a thick, ivory-colored envelope with my name written on it in Paul's elegant, sloping script. Beneath the envelope was a neat stack of papers, legal documents, deeds, and financial statements. I felt a pang of disappointment, but I carefully picked up the envelope. Paul's voice seemed to echo in my ears as I read the first few words. "My dearest Clara," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to protect you. I am sorry, Truly sorry for keeping this secret from you all these years. I didn't do it because I didn't trust you, but for the opposite reason. I did it because I loved you so much and wanted to shield you from the worries of the complicated financial world, a world I knew you never had much interest in. Tears started to well up in my eyes, blurring the words. You always thought of me as just a simple history teacher, and in my heart, that's what I was. That was my passion. But my father, the man you only knew as a quiet carpenter, was actually very gifted at seeing the value in land. He left me a few small plots in downtown Charlotte back in the 72nds, when this area was still undeveloped. I never sold them. I studied, I read, and I began to invest quietly. Every spare dollar from my teaching salary went into buying more small properties, struggling storefronts, old buildings whose potential no one else saw. I was stunned. I rifled through the papers underneath. They were deeds of ownership. Not for one, but for 8 commercial properties in prime locations across the city, places that were now bustling shops and rented out office buildings. The letter continued. I wasn't saving for wealth, Clara. I was saving for freedom. I always worried that one day, when I was gone, you would have to depend on someone else. I never wanted that to happen. I wanted you to have choices, to have the power to stand on your own 2 feet, so that no one could ever look down on you or hurt you. This entire portfolio, the buildings, and an investment fund I've built over the past 30 years, it's all yours. The current estimated value is around $7.5 million. $7.5 million. The number danced before my eyes, an unreal, unbelievable figure. I, who had just been eating scraps from a dumpster, was the owner of a fortune. The sheer irony of it all made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I read on, and then the final paragraph made the blood in my veins run cold. And there's one more thing, Clara. A few years ago, when Scott and Tiffany wanted to buy a luxury apartment they couldn't afford, I didn't give them the money. Instead, I used a portion of our funds to buy the penthouse they desired, through a trust. I let them live there for a symbolic rent, as a gift. I did it out of love for my son, but perhaps that was a mistake. The deed to that apartment is also in this stack of documents. The home they are living in, it's yours. I let the letter fall from my trembling hands. I fumbled through the stack of papers and found it. The certificate of ownership for the penthouse in Myers Park. Owner, the Thompson Trust. Sole beneficiari, Clara May Thompson. The cold, secure room suddenly felt like it was spinning. I, who had just been thrown out of my own home. I, who had been treated like a freeloader by my son and daughter-in-law. The truth was, they were the ones living off my kindness, off my husband's legacy, without even knowing it. I sat there in that cold steel room for a long time. The tears had stopped. In their place, another feeling was rising from deep within me, a feeling I hadn't had in a very, very long time. It wasn't joy about the money. It was something much more powerful. It was rage. A cold, clear, and sharp rage, like a shard of ice. I walked out of the Bank of America Tower, not with the gait of a woman who had just won the lottery. No, I walked with a steadiness and a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, drying the puddles on the sidewalk. The city of Charlotte was the same, still bustling and grand, but now, in my eyes, it was different. It was no longer a strange and hostile place. It was my chessboard. In the stack of documents, Paul had left the business card of one person, Mr. Samuel Davies, an attorney specializing in asset management and real estate. That was my first stop. Mr. Davies's office was in one of the skyscrapers I had been looking up at with despair just hours before. This time, I walked in as a client. The receptionist, a polite young woman, hesitated for a moment when she saw my appearance. My jacket was still damp and my shoes were worn, but when I stated my name and asked to see Mr. Davies regarding the estate of Paul Thompson, her attitude changed instantly. A few minutes later, I was shown into a large corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the entire city. Mr. Samuel Davies was a man of about 60, with neatly combed salt and pepper hair, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. He exuded an air of quiet wisdom. He stood up as I entered, a flicker of surprise in his eyes that was quickly masked by a look of professional sympathy. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice deep and warm, "I've been expecting your call for several months. I am so sorry for your loss." Paul was more than a client, he was a friend. I sat down in the plush leather chair opposite his desk and placed the metal box on the polished mahogany. "I think you need to see these," I said, my voice still a little hoarse from disuse, "and I need you to tell me everything." For the next 3 hours, Mr. Davies patiently explained the entirety of the legacy Paul had left me. He talked about lease agreements, monthly cash flows, investment returns, and tax obligations. Like a teacher explaining a complex lesson, he used simple terms I could understand. It turned out Paul wasn't just a wise investor, he was incredibly organized. Everything was perfectly arranged, ready for transfer. The total net monthly income from all the properties, after all expenses, was a figure that made me take a sharp breath to stay calm. When Mr. Davies was finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and looked at me intently. "So, Mrs. Thompson," he asked gently, "what would you like to do next?" I looked out the window at the cars that looked like tiny insects moving on the streets below. I thought of Scott and Tiffany, of their smugness, of their glamorous world built on the sacrifice and kindness of others. "I don't want their money," I said, my voice now firm. "I want to take away the thing they treasure most, their reputation, the fake social status my daughter-in-law has built. I want them to face the consequences, not with shouting and arguments, but with the quiet collapse of the world they hold so dear." A discreet, almost imperceptible smile touched Mr. Davies's lips. "I see," he said. "That is a strategy that requires patience and subtlety, very much in Paul's style." The first step in my plan was to disappear. Clara May Thompson, the frail, dowdy mother-in-law, had to vanish completely. In her place, a new persona would be born. Mr. Davies arranged a suite for me at the Ritz-Carlton, a place whose front door I wouldn't have even dared to look at just a day before. When the formally dressed bellman opened the door to my suite, I stepped into another universe. The room was enormous, with thick, soft carpets, elegant furniture, and a marble bathroom bigger than my old bedroom. From the window, I could see a whole corner of the city. I stood there for a long time, letting the luxury sink in, not with awe, but with a growing sense of power. That day, I did something simple but symbolic. I took a bath. I soaked in the hot, fragrant bubble bath, scrubbing my skin until it was pink, trying to wash away not just the grime of homelessness, but the feelings of shame, weakness, and invisibility that had clung to me like a second skin. When I emerged, wrapped in a plush, soft white robe, I felt like I had been reborn. The next few days were a whirlwind of transformation. Mr. Davies introduced me to a personal image consultant, a sharp woman named Isabel. Isabel didn't try to turn me into someone else. She helped me find the best version of myself, the version that had been buried under years of sacrifice and self-neglect. I was taken to a high-end hair salon. The stylist cut away my long, lifeless gray hair, replacing it with a chic, elegant bob. He colored it a warm chestnut brown with a few subtle caramel highlights. The new color brightened my face, and for the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman with vitality, not an old woman fading away. Then came the shopping. Isabel didn't take me to the trendy fast fashion stores Tiffany loved. She led me to small, boutique shops that sold timeless pieces, focusing on quality fabrics and expert tailoring. I tried on silk dresses in jewel tones, tailored suits in cream-colored tweed, and soft cashmere sweaters. I learned that true elegance wasn't about showing off a brand logo, but about the confidence and comfort the clothes gave you. I was no longer Clara in old, baggy clothes. I was Mrs. Thompson, a woman of style and substance. But the change wasn't just on the surface. Under Mr. Davies's guidance, I began to study. Every morning, after a room service breakfast, I would sit at the desk, reading financial reports, lease agreements, and learning about the stock market. At first, it was difficult. The numbers and jargon were like a foreign language. but slowly I started to see the patterns, the connections. My mind, the mind of a nurse accustomed to analyzing medical charts and memorizing complex treatment protocols, adapted quickly. I discovered I had a knack for numbers and an ability to see details others might miss. "You have a natural head for business, Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Davies remarked during one of our sessions. "Paul chose the right person to inherit his legacy." While I was busy with my metamorphosis, Mr. Davies was setting the next phase of the plan in motion. He helped me establish a charitable organization in my husband's name, the Paul Thompson Educational Heritage Fund. The fund's purpose was to provide scholarships for underprivileged students in North Carolina who wanted to pursue careers in education and history, honoring my husband's passion. This wasn't just a way to pay tribute to Paul, it was a strategic move. A charitable foundation would give me social standing, respect, and most importantly, it would give me a stage. All of the fund's activities were widely publicized. Mr. Davies hired a professional public relations firm to ensure that the name of the Paul Thompson Fund and its mysterious chairwoman, Mrs. C. M. Thompson, appeared in the city's media outlets. I didn't show my face. In the articles, there was only my name and my inspiring quotes about the importance of education. That mystery only enhanced my prestige and the public's curiosity. I was ready. The chrysalis had been in its cocoon long enough. It was time for the butterfly to emerge. The world Tiffany so desperately wanted to belong to was one built on surfaces, on carefully curated images and calculated social connections. For people like my daughter-in-law, being seen and acknowledged at prestigious events wasn't just a hobby, it was the yardstick of their existence. And the annual charity gala at the Mint Museum was the Mount Olympus of that world. It was where Charlotte's old money elite mingled with the rising stars of new money, where million-dollar deals were hinted at over glasses of champagne, and where expensive gowns were mercilessly critiqued behind polite smiles. I knew that to get on the guest list for this event, Tiffany had to have pulled every string, flattered every person, and made every promise she could. This year, it was even more critical for her, because the main sponsor, the one with the power to approve much of the guest list, was none other than the Paul Thompson Educational Heritage Fund. And the fund's mysterious chairwoman, the talk of the town, would be making her first public appearance. Tiffany saw this as a golden opportunity to get close, to snap a photo together, to prove she belonged in the highest echelons of power. I had seen her posts, her vague hints about a very special evening to come, and photos of gowns she was trying to decide between. In my luxurious hotel suite, I sat with Mr. Davies and Isabel, reviewing the final guest list on a tablet. The names Mr. and Mrs. Scott Thompson were on the initial draft, proposed by a member of the old organizing committee. My finger hovered lightly over the screen, pausing at their names. "Are you sure?" Isabel asked, a hint of hesitation in her voice. Removing them might draw unnecessary attention. I looked at her, a small smile playing on my lips. "Oh, Isabel," I said, "attention is exactly what I want, but not on me, on their absence." I moved my finger and deleted their names from the list, a simple tap that felt like a heavy door slamming shut. Instead, I had the organizers send a special, personally designed invitation to someone else, a lifestyle and food blogger named Amelia Rose. Amelia wasn't as flashy as Tiffany, but her content had more substance. She was well regarded by critics, and most importantly, she was the rival Tiffany was secretly jealous of and looked down upon. On the evening of the gala, I prepared meticulously. Isabel helped me choose a deep sapphire blue evening gown made of rich taffeta. The design was classic and modest, but it elegantly flattered my figure. It didn't scream for attention with daring cuts or flashy sequins. Its luxury came from the exquisite fabric and perfect tailoring. I wore a string of pearls Paul had given me for our 25th anniversary, a piece of jewelry that carried both memory and dignity. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I no longer saw a weak-old Clara. I saw Mrs. Thompson, a woman who radiated quiet authority, a woman who had nothing to prove. The Mint Museum was magnificently decorated with thousands of white lilies and warm crystal light. When I entered, on the arm of Mr. Davies, a small hush fell over the main hall. Heads turned, and whispers erupted. People were wondering who this mysterious woman was. My entrance was exactly as I had planned, intriguing, but not ostentatious. I spent the first half of the evening playing my role to perfection. I shook hands with the mayor, chatted with major business leaders, and listened to the thank yous from the first students who had received scholarships from the fund. I spoke calmly, smiled genuinely, and showed a real interest in each person's story. I didn't try to be the center of attention. I simply acted as if I owned the place. Meanwhile, back at home, I could picture the scene in the penthouse. Tiffany, probably already in her finest dress, would be pacing the living room, constantly checking her phone. She would have called the organizers and surely received a cold reply that there had been a mix-up in the system and her name was not on the final guest list. Her initial confusion would have turned to panic and then to rage. She would be scrolling through social media, seeing the first pictures from the party being posted. She would see all the people she wanted to impress were there, except for her. The pinnacle of my plan unfolded around the middle of the party. I was speaking with a group of people, which included the powerful editor of Charlotte magazine, the city's most prestigious society publication. Just then, Amelia Rose, looking elegant in a tasteful dress, approached to greet me. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her eyes shining with genuine admiration. "I am truly honored to be here tonight. The work your fund is doing is so inspiring." I turned, offering her my warmest smile. "Amelia, I'm so glad you could make it," I replied, making sure my voice was loud enough for the editor to hear. "I'm a quiet admirer of your work. The way you write about Charlotte's food culture, it's not just reviews, it's storytelling. You have such a deep and refined perspective." Amelia's face lit up at the praise. The editor next to me raised an eyebrow, looking intrigued. "You seem very familiar with the city's blogger scene, Mrs. Thompson," she remarked. I gave a slight shrug. "I only pay attention to those with real substance," I replied gently. "In a world full of flashy surfaces, I think we should value authentic voices. People like Amelia here are making a real contribution to our city's culture." It was an indirect but devastating blow. I never mentioned Tiffany's name, but by praising Amelia and emphasizing substance and authenticity, I had implicitly branded those who focused only on flashy surfaces as shallow. And in the small world of Charlotte's elite, a comment from a powerful figure like me carried the weight of a verdict. A moment later, I saw the editor strike up a conversation with Amelia herself. A new connection was forged right before my eyes. I knew that tomorrow, Amelia Rose's star would be on the rise, while Tiffany Thompson's absence would become a topic of gossip, a question mark over her shaky social standing. I didn't feel a crude sense of satisfaction. My feeling was more refined. It was the satisfaction of a chess player who has just made a brilliant move, one that doesn't just capture a piece, but establishes a completely dominant position. I didn't have to scream or confront anyone. I had simply redefined the playing field, and on this new field, Tiffany was no longer allowed to play. I left the party a little early, leaving behind a wake of whispers and admiration. As the luxury car drove me back to the hotel, I looked out the window at the city lights. Tiffany had taught me a valuable lesson. In her world, presence wasn't as important as a calculated absence. And tonight, her absence had spoken volumes more than any expensive dress or edited photo ever could. The charity gala at the Mint Museum sent ripples through the city, just as I'd planned. In the following days, I read the articles about the event. My name, Mrs. C.M. Thompson, was mentioned with reverence. Amelia Rose was praised as a fresh and insightful new voice, and she even landed a small column in Charlotte magazine. On the other hand, the absence of Tiffany, a familiar face at social events, became the subject of speculation in online forums and quiet conversations. The social standing she had worked so hard to build, like a house of cards, was beginning to show the first signs of collapse. But damaging Tiffany's reputation was just a surface attack, a psychological blow. It was time to attack the foundation of the world they lived in, their money and their careers. A foundation that, as I was discovering, was far more fragile than they realized. I called a meeting with Mr. Davies and my property management team, a professional firm I'd hired to handle the day-to-day operations, keeping my identity completely shielded behind a legal firewall. The The meeting took place in Mr. Davies's office, and the main topic was the Azure, the building where Scott and Tiffany's penthouse was located. Mrs. Thompson, the head of the management company, a man named Mr. Graves, began. According to our records, the lease for Penthouse PH1 under Mr. Scott Thompson is a special contract set up by the previous owner, Mr. Paul Thompson. The current rent is $800 a month. $800. For a nearly 3,000 square foot penthouse in Myers Park, where the actual market rate was no less than $6,000, the number filled me with a sense of disgust. They had been living in the lap of luxury for less than the cost of a studio apartment in a modest neighborhood. They had taken his father's kindness as a given, a permanent entitlement. "Mr. Graves," I said, my voice even and emotionless. "That special contract became void upon my husband's passing. I want to standardize all the leases in this building. Please send an official notice to Unit PH1. Effective next month, the rent will be adjusted to the current market rate, $6,200 if I'm not mistaken." Mr. Graves blinked. "Ma'am, that's an increase of more than sevenfold. They will almost certainly be unable to afford it." "That is their problem, not mine," I replied firmly. "Your company is hired to maximize profit for the owner, and I am the owner. Follow the legal procedure to the letter. Give them 30 days' notice, citing the relevant state rental laws. No exceptions." Mr. Davies nodded in approval. "It's all perfectly legal, ma'am. You are well within your rights." The official letter, printed on the letterhead of Queen City Properties, was sent the next day. I could picture the scene as Tiffany opened it, probably thinking it was another party invitation. I could imagine her initial disbelief, followed by anger, and finally, panic, as she realized it was no joke. While that first blow was being delivered, I was already aiming for my second target, Scott's career. My son worked for a mid-sized financial consulting firm called Sterling Wealth Management. From Paul's records, I knew the firm leased a large office floor in one of my commercial buildings in Uptown, the One Independence Center Tower. Their lease was due for renewal in 8 months. I held another meeting, this time with Mr. Davies and the commercial real estate team. "The Sterling Wealth Management lease," I began, getting straight to the point. "I want you to inform them that the building's new ownership, that is, us, has plans to restructure and upgrade the entire floor they currently occupy. Therefore, we will unfortunately be unable to renew their lease." The head of the commercial division, a sharp woman named Mrs. Patel, looked at me over her thick-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Thompson, Sterling is a good tenant. They always pay on time and have been here for nearly 10 years. Finding a comparable office space in Uptown at their current rate will be extremely difficult and costly for them. This could seriously impact their business operations." "I am aware of that, Mrs. Patel," I replied, "but the restructuring is my decision. Please give them early notice so they have adequate time to find a new location. It's the least we can do." That courtesy was, in fact, a carefully calculated death blow. Giving them 8 months' notice would put the leadership of Sterling Wealth Management in an impossible position. They would face enormous relocation costs and much higher rent, which would inevitably cut into their profits and likely lead to staff cuts. The pressure would be on all senior management, including Scott. His job performance, already strained by troubles at home, would now be scrutinized under an even harsher microscope. A few weeks later, the first effects began to surface. Mr. Graves informed me that he had received an irate phone call from Scott Thompson. He claimed it must be a mistake, Mr. Graves recounted over the phone. He said he had a personal agreement with the previous owner and demanded to speak directly with the new owner. I replied that all communication must go through the management company and that the new rent was non-negotiable. I could imagine Scott's helplessness. He, who always saw himself as a savvy player in the world of finance, was now powerless against a faceless corporation. He couldn't use his connections, couldn't use his charm, because he didn't even know who he was up against. At his office, things were even worse. An acquaintance of Mr. Davies, who worked in the same building, reported that the atmosphere at Sterling Wealth Management was incredibly tense. Meetings were happening constantly. Everyone was worried about the future of the company and their own jobs. Scott, as a senior financial consultant, was undoubtedly under immense pressure. And then, one evening, as I was sitting in my suite reading a historical novel, My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I usually don't answer them, but some instinct told me to. "Hello? Mom? It's me, Scott." His voice came through the line, tired and laced with something that sounded like desperation. My heart skipped a beat. It was the first time he had called me since the night he threw me out. "Where are you?" he asked. "I've been worried." A bald-faced lie. If he had been worried, he would have called sooner. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice cool and distant. "What is it, Scott?" "Mom, some strange things have been happening," he said, his voice hesitant. "The rent. They've suddenly increased it to an insane amount. And at work, the company's having trouble with the office lease. It all feels so strange. It feels like someone is deliberately trying to make things difficult for us." I remained silent, letting him talk. "I know I was wrong, Mom," he said, a hint of remorse in his voice, but I knew it was remorse born of fear. "Tiffany and we've been under a lot of stress. Could you come home? We need to talk. I miss your soup. I miss your soup." Those words, instead of softening my heart, only hardened my resolve. He didn't miss me. He missed the convenience I provided. He missed his free housekeeper. Now that his world was starting to crumble, he was reaching out to me as a lifeline. "No, Scott," I said, my voice final. "I'm not coming back. You made your choice that night. Now, live with it." I hung up before he could say anything else. I placed the phone on the table, my hand trembling slightly. Hearing my son's voice had stirred up complicated emotions inside me. But I knew I couldn't back down. Scott's call confirmed one thing: my attacks were hitting their mark. But I knew that for people like Scott and Tiffany, financial hardship was not as terrifying as public humiliation. Tiffany had built her entire career and sense of self-worth on a meticulously crafted social media image. It was time to set a match to that false facade. My plan didn't require slander or fabricated information. The truth, when placed in the right context, has more destructive power than any lie. I had Mr. Davies hire a freelance researcher, someone who specialized in open-source intelligence gathering. Her task was simple: compile Tiffany's social media activity from the past 6 months, the lavish trips, the designer shopping sprees, the dinners at expensive restaurants, and juxtapose it with the charitable activities of the Paul Thompson Fund during the same period. The result was a thick dossier filled with starkly contrasting images. On one page, a photo of Tiffany posing with a $5,000 handbag. On the facing page, a photo of my fund awarding a scholarship of the same amount to a deserving, low-income student. On one side, a dinner bill for 2 at a Michelin-starred restaurant for $800. On the other, a press release about the fund sponsoring a breakfast program for an entire elementary school in an underprivileged neighborhood. Mr. Davies, with his extensive network, accidentally let this dossier fall into the hands of a well-known investigative journalist at the Charlotte Observer, a writer famous for his sharp commentary on wealth disparity and consumer culture in the city. I didn't ask him to write anything. I simply provided him with the puzzle pieces. The rest was up to his journalistic instincts. And he did not disappoint. A week later, on a Sunday morning, the article appeared on the front page of the digital edition, right under the social commentary section. Its headline was not accusatory, but it was powerfully suggestive. "The Price of Influence: When Instagram Luxury Clashes with Charlotte's Philanthropic Reality." The article was a masterpiece of subtle takedown. It never said Tiffany was a bad person. It simply placed her boastful captions and photos of vacations in street Bart's or shopping sprees at South Park Mall, right next to stories of the Paul Thompson Fund's activities. It asked, rhetorically, about the true value of an influencer in modern society. It quoted admiring comments from Tiffany's followers, then immediately quoted the tearful thanks of a single mother whose child had just received a scholarship from my fund. The impact was like a slow-motion explosion. At first, it was just whispers on online forums, but then a few other reputable bloggers began to share the article with critical commentary. A wave of public outrage began to build. The same people who had once praised Tiffany now turned on her. The hashtag number, "The Price of Influence," started trending. Hypocrite. She's showing off a watch that costs more than my yearly tuition. While we're all struggling with inflation, she's worried about whether her Hermes bag matches her shoes. The comments were like virtual daggers, stabbing directly at the image Tiffany had so carefully constructed. I sat in my suite, reading every single one, not with glee, but with a cold sense of justice being served. I hadn't attacked her, I had simply held up a mirror, and society was judging the reflection for itself. The downfall was swift. First, a small cosmetics brand, one of Tiffany's advertising partners, issued a formal statement about pausing the collaboration to reevaluate brand strategy. That was the first domino. Soon after, a fashion company, then a luxury resort, all pulled out. Tiffany's income stream, entirely dependent on these sponsorships, was abruptly cut off. In the penthouse, the panic had to be reaching a fever pitch. I didn't need to be there to know it. Their arguments now weren't just about trivial things. They were about survival. "This is all your fault." I could almost hear Tiffany's shrill voice. "If you made more money, I wouldn't have to do this humiliating job. You're a failure." "A failure," Scott would surely roar back, his own pent-up stress finally exploding. "I'm carrying the weight of your extravagant lifestyle. Do you have any idea what the pressure is like at work right now? I could lose my job any day, and all you do is shop and take pictures." The pressure from the rent increase, the pressure from the potential corporate relocation, and now the implosion of Tiffany's social media empire, it all combined into a perfect storm, devastating their already fractured relationship. They were no longer a couple facing adversity together. They had become two enemies trapped in a cage, blaming and clawing at each other. Mr. Davies informed me that Scott had tried to get a personal loan from the bank to cover the new rent, but was rejected. Their credit history, already poor due to Tiffany's mounting credit card debt, was now in shambles. They were trapped. They were living in an apartment they couldn't afford, with a lifestyle they couldn't maintain, and a future that was completely uncertain. One evening, while taking a walk in Freedom Park, I received an email from Mr. Graves. It was a copy of an email Scott had sent to the management company. The tone was completely different from his initial anger. It was filled with desperation. He begged for an extension, offered to pay in installments, and even proposed doing odd jobs around the building to offset the rent. He had been humbled. I read the email, sitting on a park bench, watching children play. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel hatred either. I just felt a strange emptiness. This man, begging for a little mercy, was the same man who had turned up the TV volume while his mother was in pain. He was tasting the powerlessness, the feeling of being backed into a corner that he had once inflicted on me. I replied to Mr. Graves's email with a single, short sentence. Adhere to company policy, no exceptions. Their panic had reached its peak. They had run out of options. Now, there was only one path left for them, to face the music. The silence from the property management company was like a steel wall Scott couldn't break through. His desperate emails received only automated responses, citing contract clauses and company policies. The 30-day deadline was dwindling, and the specter of eviction from their gilded cage was becoming more real by the day. He was at the end of his rope, and when a man is cornered, his survival instincts kick in, sometimes in the most contemptible ways. Scott, who had always lived in fear of confrontation, finally decided to act. But instead of facing the problem like a grown man, he chose what he thought was the easiest path, seeking salvation from a higher power. One morning, Mr. Davies called me. "Mrs. Thompson, we have a new development," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Scott Thompson just called my office. He didn't call as your son, but as a financial consultant in distress. He has requested a meeting with the chairwoman of the Paul Thompson Educational Heritage Fund." I was silent for a moment. What does he want? "He wasn't specific, Mr. Davies replied. "He just said it was an extremely urgent matter concerning the future of a long-standing Charlotte business, and he believed the fund, as a responsible community organization, would want to listen. Clearly, he's referring to Sterling Wealth Management and their office lease." A plan began to form in my mind, clear and sharp. This was it, the final act. "Grant the meeting, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice calm. Schedule him for 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, in the main conference room at the fund's office, and please ensure he is the only one admitted. That night, I barely slept. I wasn't nervous. I was preparing. I stood before the large mirror in my hotel suite, rehearsing. I practiced my posture, my tone of voice, and most importantly, my gaze. I had to completely erase the image of Clara May, the mother. When Scott looked at me, he had to see Mrs. Thompson, a powerful, distant, and unmovable chairwoman. The next afternoon, I arrived at the fund's office early. It was a space I had personally selected and designed, located in one of my own buildings. It wasn't flashy, but it exuded a quiet elegance and authority, with dark oak furniture, contemporary art, and a large, dignified portrait of Paul hanging in a place of honor. I chose the largest conference room. It was a long room with a solid wood table that could seat 20. I requested that only 2 chairs be left, a presiding chair at the head of the table and a single, solitary chair at the opposite end. The distance between them was a deliberate creation of power and separation. At precisely 3 o'clock, the receptionist buzzed to inform me that Scott Thompson had arrived. My heart beat a little faster, but I took a deep, calming breath. "Send him in," I said. I sat in the head chair, my back to the door, looking out at the city skyline through the enormous plate glass wall. I heard the door open, heard Scott's hesitant footsteps on the thick carpet. He was probably awestruck by the grandeur of the room. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a little shaky. "Thank you for seeing me. My name is Scott Thompson. From—" "I know who you are, Scott," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Then, I slowly swiveled the leather chair around. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity. I watched the cascade of emotions play across my son's face, like a film on fast forward. First came confusion, as his brain tried to process the impossible image before him. Then came disbelief, his eyes squinting as if looking at a ghost. And finally, as the undeniable truth crashed down on him, came absolute, soul-shattering shock that made his face pale and made him physically stagger. "Mom?" he uttered, the word a choked whisper. He looked haggard, thinner, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. The suit he wore, though expensive, seemed to hang off his diminished frame. "Sit down, Scott," I commanded, my voice cold, devoid of any maternal warmth. I gestured to the lonely chair at the far end of the table. He stumbled forward, moving like a sleepwalker, and sank into the chair, his eyes still locked on me. I don't understand," he stammered. "This foundation, this building, what are you doing here?" "I'm not just here, Scott," I said, steepling my fingers on the tabletop. "I own this place. I own your office building. I own the penthouse you're living in. It's all mine. It's the legacy your father left for me." The truth, delivered plainly and without embellishment, hit him like a physical blow. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. And then, as the initial shock wore off, another emotion, one I was all too familiar with in him, began to surface. Cowardice. He wasn't thinking about what he'd done to me. He was thinking only of himself, of his own dire situation, and he saw me not as the mother he betrayed, but as an unexpected lifeline. And he did exactly what I knew he would do. His face crumpled, and he began to cry. Not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity. He shot up from his chair, ran around the long table, and fell to his knees beside me. "Mom," he sobbed, trying to grab my hand, which I pulled away. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. It was all Tiffany. I swear to God, it was all her. She put me up to it. She's a monster. She controlled me. She turned me into someone I'm not." I sat perfectly still, as cold as a marble statue, watching him perform his pathetic little play. "She made me live a life I couldn't afford," he continued, the words tumbling out in a torrent of tears and snot. "She criticized me every single day, told me I was a failure. I never wanted to throw you out, Mom. You have to believe me. That night, she was the one who forced me. Mom, please give me one last chance. I'll divorce her. I'll leave her right now. I'll throw her out of the house. We can start over. Okay? Just you and me, like it used to be." He looked up at me, his face a mess of tears, his eyes filled with naked desperation. He was willing to sacrifice his wife, his partner, to save himself. He was willing to cast her aside, just as he had cast me aside, without a moment's hesitation. I had waited for an apology for months. I had imagined what he would say, what he would do. But the reality unfolding before me was worse than any scenario. This wasn't remorse. This was a second betrayal. He hadn't learned a single thing. He was simply switching his allegiance to the side he now perceived as winning. My silence seemed to frighten him. I looked deep into my son's eyes, and this time, I no longer saw the little boy I had once loved. I saw a weak, selfish, and utterly broken man. I slowly stood up, forcing him to back away. I walked to the window, looking down at the bustling city below. "When you were a little boy," I began, my voice even and distant. "Every time you fell, you would cry and blame the rock. You never recognized that it was your own fault for not watching where you were going. You haven't changed, Scott. You're still that little boy." I turned back to face him. "Tiffany's cruelty is visible. It's loud, it's right there on the surface. But your cowardice, Scott, that's the real poison. It's quiet, it's insidious, and it destroys everything it touches. It destroyed our relationship, it destroyed your marriage, and it has destroyed you." I walked back to my desk, picked up a prepared folder, and placed it on the table with a final, dry thud. "This is the official eviction notice," I said, my voice without mercy. "And this is the termination of your company's office lease. You have 10 days. 10 days to move out of my house and to face the life that you have chosen." His crying stopped abruptly. He stared at me, the pleading in his eyes gone, replaced by a look of horrifying emptiness. He finally understood. There would be no salvation. There would only be consequences. Scott stood frozen in the middle of the conference room, his face still streaked with tears but his eyes now completely blank. His cowardly plea had vanished into the air, leaving behind a stark and irreversible truth. He had played his last card and lost spectacularly. He no longer saw me as a mother, nor as a savior. He saw me as a judge who had just delivered a sentence with no possibility of appeal. "Mom," he whispered, the word now sounding like a sigh of utter despair. "Are you really going to do this? You're going to throw me on the street?" I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze no longer icy, but filled with a deep, weary sadness for the son I had lost. "I'm not throwing you on the street, Scott," I said, my voice softening slightly. "I am simply stepping aside and letting you face the storms you created. You're a 40-year-old man, son. It's time you learn to either stand on your own 2 feet or suffer the consequences of your own fall." I turned my back to him, walking toward the window in a gesture that signaled the meeting was over. 10 days. That is all I can give you. Use that time wisely." He didn't say another word. I heard his heavy footsteps dragging across the carpet, the soft click of the conference room door opening and closing. I remained alone in the vast room, looking down at the city. I didn't feel victorious. The sense of triumph I thought I would feel watching them fall never came. In its place, there was just an emptiness, a profound sense of loss. I had won the war, but I had lost my only son in the process. Or perhaps, the truth was, I had lost him long ago, in the moment he chose to turn up the volume on the TV. The following days unfolded just as I'd expected. Mr. Davies informed me that Scott and Tiffany had begun moving their things out of the penthouse. The process was not a quiet one. Neighbors complained of shouting, of the sound of things being smashed. Their relationship, built on the fragile foundations of money and status, had completely disintegrated now that both were gone. Tiffany, penniless and with a ruined reputation, packed her bags and left first, leaving Scott to face the wreckage alone. On the 10th day, the penthouse was returned to the management company. It was empty and cold, bearing the scars of a battle, a dent in the wall, a wine stain on the hardwood floor they hadn't bothered to clean. I didn't go back. I had no desire to see the place that held so much of my pain. I instructed the management company to have a professional team clean, repair, and sell it. I wanted nothing to do with that past. With a portion of the money from the sale, I did something for myself. I bought back my old house, Paul's and my house, the one Scott had convinced me to sell. Luckily, the new owners hadn't changed much. When I stepped over the threshold again, it felt like coming home after a long and terrible nightmare. I wandered through the rooms, touching the familiar furniture. I stood in the kitchen where Paul and I had danced, and for the first time in months, I cried. Not tears of anger or humiliation, but tears of release and of memory. But I knew I couldn't live only in the past. The legacy Paul left me wasn't a golden cage to lock myself in. It was a pair of wings, and it was time for me to learn to fly. I began to devote all my time and energy to the Paul Thompson Fund. It was no longer a tool for revenge. It became my reason for being. I was no longer a mysterious chairwoman. I stepped into the light, attending board meetings, meeting with educators, and personally interviewing scholarship applicants. I listened to their stories, their dreams, their struggles. In the eyes of those determined young people, I saw the future. One of the first projects I initiated was the purchase of an old, struggling library in a poor neighborhood that was at risk of closing. We funded its renovation, turning it into a modern community hub with a computer lab, free tutoring classes, and a quiet reading garden. On the day of its grand opening, as I stood watching the excited children run in to explore the new bookshelves, a deep sense of peace settled over me. This was true wealth. Not the numbers in a bank account, but the ability to make a difference, however small, in the lives of others. I stopped following news about Scott or Tiffany. I had left them behind. But then one day, about 6 months later, as I was shelving books in the new library, one of the young volunteers came up to me, looking a little hesitant. "Mrs. Thompson, there's someone here to see you. He says he's your son." My heart stopped. I walked outside and saw Scott standing on the porch, half hidden in the shadows. He looked completely different. He was thinner, with the sun-weathered skin of someone who works with their hands. He wore simple work clothes, stained with a few specks of paint. There was no trace of the slick financial consultant. He looked at me, and his eyes held no desperation or pleading, but a quiet shame and perhaps a flicker of newly earned dignity. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice a little rough. We stood in silence for a moment. "I'm working for a construction crew," he finally said, answering my unasked question. "It's hard work, but it's honest. I'm renting a small room on the west side." He hesitated. "Tiffany. She filed for divorce." I don't blame her. I just nodded, not knowing what to say. "I didn't come here to ask for anything," he continued, looking me straight in the eye. I wanted to apologize. A real apology. I was a terrible son, a terrible husband, and a terrible person. There are no excuses. I was a coward. I was wrong. He took a deep breath. "I know you may never forgive me. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that, every day, I'm trying to be a man that Dad wouldn't be ashamed of." With that, he didn't wait for my reply. He just gave a small nod, turned, and walked away. I stood there, watching his back, until he disappeared around the corner. I didn't call him back. His apology, now that it had finally come, didn't matter as much as I once thought it would. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I could bestow upon him. It was a journey he had to walk on his own. Maybe one day our paths would cross again, maybe not. I went back inside the library, where the sound of children's laughter filled the air. I picked up a book, feeling its familiar weight in my hands. People say that revenge is a dish best served cold, but they're wrong. Revenge isn't a dish at all. It's just a ravenous hunger, and once it's satisfied, it leaves you empty. Love, giving, and building something beautiful from the ashes of the past, now that is a true feast. I had lost a son, but I had found myself. And in the peaceful quiet of the library that bore my husband's name, I realized that, in the end, it was a fair trade. My new life was just beginning. 5 years have passed since that day at the library. Life, like a river, eventually finds its natural course, carrying everyone to their own destination. Every now and then, I still hear scattered bits of news about the people who were once at the center of my life's storm. Tiffany, after leaving Charlotte, tried to rebuild her career in another city. I heard she made a few attempts, starting new social media channels under different names, but the shadow of the scandal was too large. In the digital world, the past never truly dies. The last I heard, she had married a wealthy, older dentist, having found, I suppose, another way to maintain the lifestyle she always craved. I feel no animosity, only a vague pity for a woman who spent her life chasing glittering shadows without ever realizing her own true worth. And Scott, my son, is still in Charlotte. We don't see each other often, maybe just 2 or 3 times a year, on major holidays. Those meetings are always a bit awkward, as if we are two strangers trying to learn how to speak to each other again. He still works in construction, and I know he has paid off all his debts. He lives a simple, quiet life. Sometimes, he comes to the library, not to see me, but just to sit in a quiet corner and read a history book. I see him there, from a distance, and I leave him be. Some wounds never fully heal, they just become scars that remind us of the battles we fought. I haven't forgiven him in the way people usually think of it, a complete erasure of the wrong. Instead, I accept that he is a flawed man who made terrible mistakes and is spending the rest of his life quietly atoning for them. Perhaps that, too, is a form of peace. And me, Clara Mae Thompson. Well, my house is now always filled with the laughter of neighborhood kids I teach to bake, or with friends from my gardening club. The Paul Thompson Fund has grown beyond my wildest dreams, becoming one of the most respected private educational foundations in the state. I found my purpose not in revenge, but in building. I have built libraries, funded scholarships, and most importantly, I have rebuilt my own life on a foundation of truth and self-respect. Looking back on it all, I realized that life taught me some hard but invaluable lessons. I learned that love, without respect, can become a prison. That sacrifice, when it's not acknowledged, only feeds the selfishness of others. I learned that true strength isn't found in silent endurance, but in knowing when to speak up, when to draw a line in the sand and say, enough. Revenge was once my fuel, the fire that kept me warm during the long, cold nights of despair. But a fire, after it has burned what needs to be burned, goes out. If you keep trying to stoke it, the only person who gets burned in the end is you. The real legacy Paul left me wasn't the millions. It was the chance to discover my own legacy, my inner strength, my compassion, and my ability to turn pain into purpose. I am no longer the widow, the abandoned mother, or the victim of betrayal. I am Mrs. Thompson, the planter of seeds of knowledge. I am Clara Mae, who finds joy in a newly opened rose. And sometimes, on quiet afternoons, as I sit alone in my garden with a cup of tea, I realize the greatest lesson of all. Life can take everything from you, your family, your home, your dignity. But there is one thing no one can ever take away unless you let them, and that is the power to write the final chapter of your own story. And my final chapter, I decided, would not be a tale of revenge, but an epic of rebirth. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you are connected with it, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, drop a comment below with your thoughts or your own story. Let's keep the empathy and sharing going.